Right now, somewhere in Lancaster County, an Amish family is sleeping soundly in a room that should be sweltering. No air conditioner, no box fan rattling in the window, no electric bill climbing every July, just a quiet farmhouse, a hot summer night outside, and a bedroom that somehow stays cool until morning. Meanwhile, in a modern house 2 miles away, fully insulated, fully sealed, fully energy efficient, a family is lying on top of their sheets at midnight because the bedroom feels like the inside of a closed car. Same night, same outside temperature, wildly different experience. That gap is not luck, and it is not magic. It is physics that almost everyone has forgotten how to use, and it costs about $5 to bring back into your own bedroom tonight. My name is Eli, and this is Next Reveal, the channel where we dig up the practical knowledge that quietly disappeared once there was no longer any money in teaching it to you. Not folklore, not wellness fads, real mechanical and thermal principles that worked for generations before anyone had a compressor humming in their window, and that still work exactly the same way today, in your house tonight, if you know how to set them up. Here's the uncomfortable question worth sitting with for a second. Why does a 200-year-old farmhouse with no insulation to speak of often run cooler at night than a house built in the last few decades with all the modern upgrades? It seems backwards. More insulation, tighter construction, better windows. Shouldn't that house be the comfortable one? But that's only part of the story, and the answer reveals something almost nobody thinks about when they're lying awake sweating at 1 a.m. Most people assume their bedroom is hot at night because the day was hot. Simple cause and effect. Sun goes up, temperature goes up, room gets hot, room stays hot. But that explanation falls apart the moment you actually measure things. On plenty of summer nights, the air outside drops into the comfortable 60s by early morning, while the air inside a bedroom barely moves. If the outside air is genuinely cooler than the inside air, then something inside the house is generating or holding onto heat independently of what's happening outdoors. And that something is the structure of the house itself. Wood, drywall, insulation batting, even the framing lumber in your walls. All of it absorbs heat throughout the day like a battery charging up. By evening, that thermal mass is loaded. In an old farmhouse with open framing, minimal insulation, and gaps around doors, windows, and floorboards, that stored heat has somewhere to go. It escapes. It moves outward into the cooling night air, the same way heat always moves from a warmer object to a cooler one. But in a modern, tightly sealed home, built with vapor barriers, weather stripping, and insulation designed specifically to stop air movement, the heat has nowhere to escape to. It just radiates back into the living space all night long, which is exactly the opposite of what you want when you're trying to sleep. Here's where things become interesting, because this isn't guesswork. It's basic building science, and it's been documented for decades. The same airtight construction that makes a house efficient to heat in January makes it terrible at shedding heat in July, unless you deliberately give that heat somewhere to go. This is where the Amish approach diverges from what most modern homeowners ever try. It isn't about better materials. It's about working with two physical principles that cost nothing to use, plus one inexpensive trick that adds a final layer most people have never even heard of. The first principle is something engineers call the stack effect, and you've actually experienced it your whole life without realizing it. It's the exact same physics that makes smoke rise up and out of a chimney instead of filling a room. Warm air is less dense than cool air, so it rises. If you give that warm air an exit point near the top of a structure and a cooler air source down low, the warm air leaves on its own and pulls cooler air in behind it automatically. No fan required, no electricity required. Just a continuous path for air to move through, top to bottom. In an older farmhouse, that path already exists, almost by accident. A basement or cellar that stays cool because it's underground, an attic that gets hot and naturally vents, and enough gaps in old construction joints that air can actually travel between them. In a modern sealed house, that path has been deliberately closed off in the name of efficiency. The basement door stays shut. The attic hatch is sealed tight. There's no continuous route for the stack effect to do its job, so the heat just sits in a layer over your bed all night, going nowhere. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple, and it's free. Open the root. If you have a basement or crawl space, open the door or hatch leading into it. Open one window on the coolest side of your house, usually north or east facing, away from the afternoon sun. And open one vent or window as high up in the structure as you can safely reach, whether that's an upstairs window, a stairwell vent, or an attic hatch. That pressure difference between the cool air down low and the warm air trapped up high does the rest. The air starts moving on its own, continuously, all night, with zero machinery involved. But the night draw alone is only the first layer. And if you stop there, you'll feel a difference, but not the full effect. The deeper question is how you take ordinary moving air and make it actually cold, not just less hot. And that's where the second principle comes in, the one most homesteading advice completely skips. It's called evaporative cooling, and you already know it intimately, even if you've never heard the term, because it's the exact mechanism behind why you feel a chill stepping out of a swimming pool on a warm day. Water evaporating off a surface pulls thermal energy from the air around it in order to change from liquid to vapor. That energy loss shows up as a measurable drop in temperature. It's not a trick. It's basic thermodynamics, and it's been used deliberately for cooling, in one form or another, for thousands of years, from clay water jars in ancient desert civilizations to the swamp coolers still used across the American Southwest today. To apply it to your bedroom window costs about $1 worth of material, a length of plain, untreated, loosely woven cotton. The rougher and less processed the better, because tightly woven or synthetic fabric won't let air pass through it the way you need. Soak it in cold water, wring it until it's damp but not dripping, and hang it across the window you've opened for your night draw. As air moves through that damp cloth on its way into the room, it picks up moisture, and giving up that moisture costs the air some of its heat. The air coming out the inside of that cloth is measurably cooler than the air going in. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this channel exists to give you accurate information, not hype. Evaporative cooling is dramatically more effective in dry climates than humid ones. If the air outside is already saturated with moisture, it can't absorb much more from the cloth, and the temperature drop will be modest. This isn't a flaw in the method. It's just how the physics works, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. In a dry climate, this single piece of cloth can produce a startling drop in temperature. In a humid one, it adds a smaller but still noticeable improvement on top of whatever the night draw is already doing. This brings us to the historical layer of this story, because none of this is new information being rediscovered for the first time. Agricultural extension offices throughout the early 20th century regularly published guidance for rural households on passive cooling, using basements, attics, shaded porches, and airflow management to keep farmhouses livable through summer before residential air conditioning became affordable or widespread. This wasn't fringe knowledge. It was mainstream, practical engineering aimed at people who had no electrical cooling option and needed one anyway. As home air conditioning became cheap and common through the mid-20th century, that body of passive cooling knowledge simply stopped being necessary information for most households, and it faded out of common practice. Not because it stopped working, but because nobody needed it anymore, and there was no commercial incentive to keep teaching it. Communities that never adopted mechanical air conditioning in the first place, including many Amish and Mennonite households across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, simply kept using what already worked, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. They preserved a relationship with these principles that the rest of us only have to rediscover. If this kind of forgotten practical knowledge is something you want more of, this is exactly the kind of material we dig up every week here on Next Reveal, so consider sticking around for what's coming next. There's one more layer worth understanding, because it explains why this method works even better than people expect once both pieces are combined. A house isn't just one room, it's a connected system of air. When you open a path from a cool basement through a bedroom and out a high vent or attic hatch, you're not just cooling that one room. You're using the entire thermal mass of the house as part of the system. The basement stays cool because the surrounding earth insulates it from daytime heat. That coolness becomes the supply air for your night draw. The attic, which heats up dramatically during the day, becomes the exhaust point once the sun goes down and it starts losing heat rapidly to the night sky. You're essentially turning your own house into a passive cooling appliance, using temperature differences that already exist in the structure for the cost of opening a few doors and hanging a piece of damp cloth. It's worth being clear about the limits here too, because credibility matters more than excitement. These methods make an ordinary hot night noticeably more comfortable, and in dry climates the difference can be dramatic. But they are not a substitute for real cooling during an actual heat emergency, especially for infants, elderly people, or anyone with heart or respiratory conditions. If a heat wave doesn't break overnight, or if anyone in the house shows signs of heat exhaustion, confusion, a racing heart, or a stop in sweating despite the heat, that's the moment for air conditioning, a cooling center, or medical help, not a damp cloth in the window. But for the overwhelming majority of ordinary hot summer nights, the combination of an open air path and a single piece of damp cotton can take a bedroom that's been unbearable for years and turn it into one you actually look forward to sleeping in. No contractor, no new equipment, no recurring cost. Just airflow and evaporation working exactly the way they always have, in any house built mostly of wood, whether it's 200 years old or 20. Try it tonight if your bedroom runs hot. Open the path from your coolest space to your highest vent, hang a length of damp cotton across the window catching that airflow, and see what your thermometer reads by morning. If you want more of this kind of grounded, practical knowledge, the kind that quietly disappeared once nobody could sell it to you, subscribe to Next Reveal, because there's a lot more of it still buried in old extension bulletins and forgotten trades, waiting to be brought back into ordinary use. The most valuable knowledge isn't always the newest. Sometimes it's just the knowledge nobody had a reason to remind you about.